Hello, dear listener. I recently got myself from Amazon The Incredible Mel Brooks, a kind of book format, but it has 5 DVDs and a CD and some text. And I also got the box set from Fox, I guess now Disney, of many of Mel Blanc's movies. Mel Brooks. And I'm going to read Leonard Maltin's contribution to The Incredible Mel Brooks. Blazing a Comedy Trail. In life, as in comedy, timing is everything. For someone who set his sights on a show business career, Mel Brooks couldn't have come along at a better time. A decade earlier or later, and he might have missed out on one or more of the media where he plied his trade with such success. The Borscht Belt, live television, the Broadway Review, series television, the radio commercial, the comedy album, movies, and big-time Broadway. Instead, he conquered them all and built a devoted following along the way. If people regard Brooks primarily as a movie maker, it's difficult to argue. After all, he made 3 of the funniest movies of all time: The Producers, Blazing Saddles, and Young Frankenstein. But if they haven't heard the 2,000-year-old man records he made with Carl Reiner, or don't remember the radio spots along the same lines he did with Dick Cavett for Ballantine Beer as the 2,500-year-old brewmaster, they're missing out on a big chunk of Brooksian comedy. If people think of him as a relative newcomer to Broadway, where the musical version of The Producers, 2001, broke records and swept the Tony Awards, they haven't done their homework. He wrote a sketch for Leonard Sillman's popular review New Faces of 1952, which ran for almost a year. It was later committed to film, giving him his first screen credit in 1954 as Melvin Brooks. He later worked on the 1957 musical play Shinbone Alley and shared a book credit with lyricist Joe Darien. The play, about Don Marquis's famous characters Archie, an erudite cockroach, and Mehetable, a rat, was transformed into an animated feature in 1971. Then, in 1962, he wrote the book for a musical starring Ray Bolger called All American, which boasted a score by Lee Adams and Charles Strouse. It barely lasted 2 months, but it gave him his first solo writing credit on Broadway, shortly after his TV writing colleague Neil Simon made his debut on The Great White Way with Come Blow Your Horn. Simon continued to write plays, as we all know, but Brooks had other fields to explore. By this time, he had stepped in front of the curtain by starring on a comedy album called 2,000 Years with Carl Reiner and Mel Brooks, 1961, playing a blunt-spoken 2,000-year-old man with a heavy Jewish accent. It was Steve Allen who encouraged Carl and Mel to record their spontaneous conversations after hearing them perform it at a party. This was the golden age of comedy records. People sat in their living rooms and listened to Bob Newhart, Shelley Berman, Nichols and May, and Bill Cosby, as well as novelty records such as the runaway success The First Family, which parodied the Kennedys. The success of the Reiner-Brooks album demanded a follow-up before the year was out, and made the team a headline attraction on The Ed Sullivan Show, The Steve Allen Show, The Hollywood Palace, The Andy Williams Show, and other variety programs. After more than a decade of sitting in the writer's room creating material for other performers, Mel Brooks was now a comedy star himself, and a fierce, and a and a force to reckon with. I'll just leave it in. A personal note. I was one of those people who was addicted to comedy records, so I recognized Brooks's voice the instant I heard it on the soundtrack of Ernie Pintoff's clever short, The Critic, in 1963. I had gone to my local movie theater in Teaneck, New Jersey, to see Stanley Kubrick's Dr. Strangelove, but the 3-minute short that accompanied it made me laugh so much that I sat through Dr. Strangelove all over again, just so I could watch The Critic, 1963, one more time. The concept is elegantly simple. Modern art images appear on screen to the strains of harpsichord music. Suddenly an old Jewish man mutters, "What the hell is this?" He becomes a Greek chorus for the odd and provocative graphics, and his utterances get funnier and funnier. $2 out the window, Murray! 5 years before Brooks got the chance to write and to direct a feature film, The Critic won a 1963 Academy Award for Best Animated Short Subject. It remains what it always was, a perfect little film. Then, in 1965, he hit pay dirt again when he and Buck Henry created a James Bond secret agent spoof for television called Get Smart. Brooks told Time magazine, "I was sick of all those nice, sensible situation comedies. They were such distortions of life. I wanted to do a crazy, unreal comic strip type of thing about something besides a family. No one had ever done a show about an idiot before. I decided to be the first." With Don Adams ideally cast as Agent Maxwell Smart, Get Smart became a hit. Brooks wasn't involved with the show past the pilot stage, but he and Henry established the template for the comedy that ensued. All of this took place before Mel Brooks ever set foot behind a camera and gained a form of immortality by making a series of memorable comedy features. So where does Melvin Kaminsky's comedy come from? Some would say from Brooklyn, where a generation of comedians and comedy writers were raised. There is no question that growing up in the Jewish district of Williamsburg during the Depression helped shape his outlook and worldview. But there were other factors at work. Brooks once told me, "Before television, babies were the amusantes of the world. I was the baby of my family, 3 older brothers, and I was the baby. I amused my family, and I thought that was my mandate, to amuse my older brothers and my mother. My father died when I was a little kid. I was only 2, so they literally needed somebody to keep the spirit of happiness in the household." He also admitted that the loss of his father, who was just 34 when he died of kidney disease, made him angry. A sense of humor became his armor. And what of the Depression? "Ignorance is bliss. I didn't know I was poor. I didn't know that my mother didn't know how to make spaghetti, that we were Jews. My mother used to take the noodles, Mueller's, it's hardly La Rosa, boil it up, put ketchup on it, put it in the oven, bake it till it was hard, and serve it, and say, 'Spaghetti!' And we said, 'Oh, great, this is good.' Later I went to some Italian friend's household, and his mother made spaghetti. I said, 'No, spaghetti's hard, and it's baked.' But this was heaven. I came home and I said, 'Mom, you've been lying to me about spaghetti.'" When new acquaintances asked where he was from, and he said Williamsburg, the more naive strangers would ask if he meant Virginia. He would sheepishly admit that it was a part of Brooklyn. Then, in an unpredictable turn of events, he wound up at the Virginia Military Institute. "I was in high school in Brooklyn, Eastern District High School, and these Army recruiters came round and said, 'You can go to college at 17 and a half. We can accelerate your high school graduation, and you can go to college, so take the test.' I took the test, and I passed, and they said, 'You can go to Harvard, you can go to MIT, you can go to Princeton, or you can go to the Virginia Military Institute in Lexington.' I said, 'I like that. I'm going to end up in the Army anyway. Maybe they'll teach me how to ride a horse.' So I went to VMI for about 6 months, and it was great. I saw trees, grass, It was wonderful. I learned a lot. It was a great school, and for a kid from Brooklyn, the juxtaposition of being at VMI was incredible. Brooks studied psychology and became an avid reader, with a special fondness for Russian literature. He had always been a movie fan, but like his fellow writers on the Sid Caesar Show years later, he developed a taste for foreign films, particularly the great Italian neo-realist works, such as Bicycle Thieves and Miracle in Milan. After serving in the Army in World War II, he received a different kind of schooling in the Borscht Belt. In the post-war era, the resort hotels of the Catskill Mountains of New York reached a peak of popularity, offering endless food and entertainment for their mostly Jewish clientele. It was here that Melvin Kaminsky became Mel Brooks, shortening his mother's maiden name of Brookman, and found work as a drummer. His fondness for music has never abated, nor has his timing, a quality essential to both drumming and comedy. The story goes that he filled in for a stand-up comedian who failed to show up one night, which may or may not be true, but in time he was not only performing on stage, he was filling one of the Catskills' most distinctive jobs as a tumbler. A tumbler spent the better part of each day roaming the grounds, making jokes, disrupting activities, and keeping things lively for the guests, as well as serving as master of ceremonies for the evening's entertainment. Another Brooklyn-born Kaminsky, later known as Danny Kaye, worked as a tumbler for a decade earlier. Then in 1949, in the earliest days of live television, Brooks joined an extraordinary group of men and one woman who formed the writing staff of the Admiral Broadway Review, which made a star of a fellow Catskills graduate, Sid Caesar. The team soon migrated to Your Show of Shows, a landmark 90-minute variety program on NBC that aired on Saturday nights. It was produced by yet another Borscht Belt veteran, Max Liebman, and featured musical acts and guest stars along with Caesar, as well as a uniquely gifted, versatile trio of co-stars, Imogen Coca, Carl Reiner, and Howard Morris. After Coca left the show, it was shortened and rechristened Caesar's Hour. Under any name, it represented the smartest, funniest sketch comedy on television, created by educated, inquisitive, ferocious young men, including Mel Tonkin, Danny and Neil Doc Simon, Lucille Callan, Mel Brooks, and honorary member Reiner. Another great talent, Larry Gelbart, joined the Caesar's Hour staff in 1954, while Woody Allen worked on some subsequent Caesar TV specials. No comedian in television history has had a writing staff to match this lineup. And no television production has inspired so many offspring. Carl Reiner used the writer's room as inspiration for The Dick Van Dyke Show. Neil Simon tried to replicate it verbatim in his Broadway play Laughter on the 23rd Floor. And in the same vein, Mel Brooks produced the nostalgic movie My Favorite Year, with Joseph Bologna as a variation of Sid Caesar. Brooks' philosophy of comedy was shared by his confreres. There are two basic pillars that support comedy, he maintains. One of them is anger. Anger at the system, anger at the inequity, anger at the greedy, anger at the people who won't share. And the other one is completely opposite. It's celebration. It's the joy of life, sharing those incandescent, glorious moments of simply being alive. Reiner has often recounted the origin of the 2,000-year-old man. He spontaneously threw a question at Brooks one day in the writer's room, and Mel responded in character. The duo subsequently performed the routine ad lib at parties for years to follow, which satisfied Brooks's yearning to be in the limelight. He had sublimated his desire to perform when he landed his first TV gig. In a 1992 interview, he told me, "When I met Sid Caesar and I wrote your show of shows, I said, I don't have to do that. He can do it better than I can. If Sid Caesar wasn't so damn funny, I would have been performing 20 years ago." Brooks has never lost touch with colleagues from this golden phase of his career. Reiner remains his closest friend. Sid Caesar and Howard Morris were featured in several Brooks comedies. They also reunited for the Sid Caesar, Imogene Coca, Carl Reiner, Howard Morris special in 1967, which earned Brooks and his fellow writers an Emmy Award. Ronnie Graham, whom he met while writing for Leonard Selman's New Faces of 1952 on Broadway, became a frequent collaborator on Brooks's later movies. Similarly, Brooks met composer John Morris when he worked on the musical play Shinbone Alley. They crossed paths again when Morris conducted the pit orchestra for All American in 1961 and obviously hit it off. Brooks had him score virtually all of his films, including such serious projects as The Elephant Man, produced by his Brooks Films company. With a solid television career behind him, it shouldn't have been difficult for Mel Brooks to launch a film career, but everything about The Producers, 1968, was fraught with problems. Although Brooks secured the financing from independent producer Joseph E. Levine and managed to shoot the picture on a tight budget and schedule, Levine was unenthusiastic about the result, to put it mildly, and forced Brooks to drop the title Springtime for Hitler. The gleefully perverse film about a scheming Broadway producer and his naive accomplice was barely released, receiving mixed reviews and losing money on its original run. Yet it developed a fervent fan base, and at year's end earned 2 1968 Academy Award nominations, one for Gene Wilder as Best Supporting Actor, and one for Mel Brooks for Best Original Screenplay. Brooks won the Oscar, which was a form of vindication for all the slings and arrows he suffered birthing his debut feature. The Producers has gone on to be justly regarded as one of the great American comedies. It also cemented a friendship between Brooks and Wilder that would continue to bear fruit. 2 years passed before Brooks could get backing for another independent feature, The 12 Chairs, 1970, based on a venerable Russian novel that was filmed many times, often without credit, since its publication in 1927. He cast Ron Moody, Frank Langella, and Dom DeLuise, who would become a close friend and compatriot, and gave himself a small but showy part in what he had since called a serious film with comedy in it. Filmed in the former Yugoslavia, it faced even tougher sledding than The Producers in finding a wide audience. He also contributed a song, Hope for the Best, Expect the Worst. It would be 4 years before Brooks landed another movie deal, this time at a major studio. Warner Brothers owned a screenplay by Andrew Bergman that lampooned westerns. For the first time since his television days, Brooks collaborated on a screenplay with Bergman, Norman Steinberg, Alan Uger, and, significantly, Richard Pryor, which later became his standard M.O., and for the first time he parodied a well-known movie genre. The film's original title was Black Bart, referring to its main character. It was renamed Blazing Saddles, 1974, and while it is widely acclaimed today, Brooks faced stern opposition from some of the Warner Brothers brass after they first saw it. One executive said it should be shelved. Another insisted that he remove some of the more controversial and hilarious moments, including the campfire scene, which involved a normal human activity, especially after eating beans, that no one had depicted on film before. Then someone arranged a screening for studio secretaries and other ordinary people, who rocked the room with laughter. The rest is comedy history. Blazing Saddles featured 2 of Mel's talented friends, Gene Wilder, a last-minute replacement for Hollywood veteran Gig Young and Dom DeLuise, and expanded his repertory company to include the gifted Madeline Kahn. Mel gave himself 2 small roles, as a Yiddish-spouting Indian chief, and as Governor Lepetomaine, whose outrageous shtick he once described as "a little Hugh Hubert and a little Harry Ritz," citing 2 great comedians of the past. Lepetomaine, not so incidentally, was the name of a professional flautist whose vaudeville act consisted of creative farting. More importantly, Blazing Saddles established Mel Brooks as a brand name for a mass audience. Brooks acquired an important ally in studio chief Alan Ladd Jr. at 20th Century Fox, where he made Young Frankenstein, 1974, and his next 3 features. Young Frankenstein was based on a script Gene Wilder had already written, but by the time the 2 collaborators were finished expanding and revising it, it was a polished gem. The choice of cast couldn't have been improved, with Wilder as Dr. Frankenstein, joined by Madeline Kahn, Marty Feldman, Peter Boyle, Cloris Leachman, Terry Garr, Kenneth Mars, and Gene Hackman. At this point, with the backing of Ladd, Brooks had the clout to make Silent Movie, 1976, a daring commercial move a generation before The Artist came along, and cast himself in the leading role alongside Dom DeLuise and Marty Feldman. He followed it with his affectionate Alfred Hitchcock spoof High Anxiety, 1977, starring opposite Madeline Kahn, and the ambitious History of the World Part 1, 1981, which features the spectacular musical production number The Inquisition, choreographed by his longtime colleague Alan Johnson. He then chose Johnson to direct him and his wife, Anne Bancroft, in a 1983 remake of Ernst Lubitsch's classic World War II comedy, To Be or Not to Be. But audiences responded most enthusiastically to what they expected of Mel Brooks, movie parodies. So he gave them what they wanted in the outrageous Spaceballs, 1987, the gloriously silly Robin Hood Men in Tights, 1993, and the underrated Dracula, Dead and Loving It, 1995. He also directed, co-wrote, and starred in Life Stinks, 1991, a pet project that failed to connect with critics or moviegoers, to Brooks' chagrin. The story of a ruthless business tycoon who tries to survive on the streets for 1 month without money, it flopped in America, he feels, because of its downbeat title. 4 years afterward, he insisted that it was the film he would be remembered for. "Comedy will never get the respect it deserves. I know that's part of the deal," he told me. "The Marx Brothers never won anything. Chaplin never won anything." But every rule has its exception. For 3 successive years, 1997, 1998, 1999, Mel Brooks won Emmy Awards as Outstanding Guest Actor in a Comedy Series for his recurring and uproarious appearances as Uncle Phil in the Paul Reiser-Helen Hunt sitcom Mad About You. Before then, and since, Brooks has appeared in other people's films and shows, making cameos in a variety of movies and lending his unmistakable voice to animated cartoons of all sorts. Moreover, in 1997, he and Carl Reiner decided to revisit their stand-up roots with a new recording called The 2,000-Year-Old Man in the Year 2000, which delighted fans and won a Grammy Award as Best Spoken Comedy Album. Next, he staged his own Broadway comeback. No one, not even Brooks himself, could have envisioned that his one-time box office flop, The Producers, would spawn a wildly successful Tony Award-winning Broadway musical more than 30 years later. And not even the most imaginative comic mind could have predicted that it would be a hit around the world, even in Berlin. The musical adaptation by Brooks and Thomas Meehan softened the 1968 screenplay to make it more palatable and politically correct, It was later transferred to the screen with its original Broadway stars, Nathan Lane and Matthew Broderick. The show's enormous success paved the way for a musical version of Young Frankenstein. So what does a living legend do for an encore? Mel Brooks is continually celebrated around the world, accepting plaudits from the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences, the AFI, and other prestigious organizations. A coveted interview subject, he is as sharp and funny as ever. His films attract new generations of fans, even as their original admirers enjoy revisiting them over and over again. That's a pretty good legacy for a show business crazy kid from Brooklyn. Thank you for listening.